The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, the same one my wife and I had bought at an estate sale in '94, the one with the small burn mark near the left corner where she set a hot casserole dish down one Thanksgiving, and we laughed about it every year after. I was sitting there reading the paper. I still get the actual paper, the kind that leaves ink on your fingers, when my phone buzzed against the wooden surface. It was my attorney, not the one I'd had for 30 years, but the new one, a woman named Elspeth Rawlings, who'd taken over my affairs after my old friend Harvey retired and moved to Tucson. She was efficient in a way that sometimes felt cold, but that morning her voice was different. Careful. "I need you to come in today," she said. "There's something I found in the estate documents, something that's been waiting." I asked her what she meant. "Your wife," she said slowly, "left something behind, something that wasn't part of the formal will. I think you should see it before anyone else does." She said it quietly, that last part. "Before anyone else does." I set down my coffee cup. "I'll be there in an hour." My wife passed 3 years ago this past March, 41 years of marriage. We met when I was 26 and she was 23, both of us working at the same regional hospital. I was a medical supply coordinator and she was a pediatric nurse. She used to say she fell in love with me because I was the only man she'd ever met who apologized to the vending machine when it ate his quarter. I don't know what that says about me, but she married me anyway. Her name was Sylviane, not Sylvia, not Sylvie, Sylviane. Her grandmother was from Louisiana, and the name traveled down through the family like an heirloom no one was quite sure what to do with. She loved that name. She wore it like it fit. 41 years. 2 children. 1 house in Millbrook, Ohio, that we paid off in 2009 and threw a small dinner party to celebrate. She made her mother's chicken with mustard cream sauce, and we drank a bottle of wine we'd been saving for 11 years. Just the 2 of us. We didn't need a crowd. When she got sick, it moved faster than the doctors expected. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in September, gone by February. That 5-month window is still blurry to me in places. I remember certain moments with perfect clarity, the way the afternoon light came through the hospital blinds, the smell of the hand lotion the nurses used, the exact sound of her breathing the last morning I sat beside her, and then other stretches of that time are just gray, just gone. Our son was 40 years old when she passed. Our daughter was 37. I'd spent the 3 years since doing what men my age do when they lose their wives, keeping busy enough not to fall apart. I volunteered at the community garden on Wednesdays. I taught myself to make bread. I called my daughter every Sunday. I visited my son and his wife when invited, which was not as often as I would have liked, but I told myself that's how it goes. People have their own lives. I believed that. I believed a lot of things. Elspeth's office was downtown, on the 4th floor of a building that had been a department store in the 1950s and still had the original tile floors in the lobby. I'd always liked that about it. Some things you shouldn't tear out just because they're old. She met me herself at the front desk, which she didn't usually do, and walked me back to her office without the usual pleasantries. She closed the door. On her desk was a sealed envelope. It wasn't white. It was the color of old cream, heavy stock, the kind Sylviane used for her personal correspondence. She'd had a whole box of it she ordered from a stationery shop in Vermont. She wrote thank you notes on it, birthday cards, letters to her sister in Portland. My name was on the front in her handwriting. "Where did you find this?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. It was in a secondary folder attached to the original estate filing. "Your wife apparently gave it to Harvey's office directly. She asked him to hold it for 3 years before disclosing it." Elspeth paused. She made him promise not to mention it before then. He honored that. 3 years. She'd planned it that way. 3 years. I looked at the envelope for a long moment. "Did you read it?" "No, I wouldn't, but I did see the note she attached to the outside of the folder." She slid a small card across the desk. In Sylviane's handwriting, it read, "For Robert, 3 years from today. Don't let our children be there when he reads this." I sat down in the chair. "I'll step out," Elspeth said. I didn't answer. I was already breaking the seal. Her handwriting was smaller than it used to be. She'd always written in big looping letters when we were young, the kind that took up the whole line. But near the end, things had gotten quieter and smaller, like she was conserving something, like she was aware of her own margins. The letter was 4 pages long. I'm not going to share all of it. Some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you what she said, because she deserved to be heard, and because I spent 23 days after I read it, sitting with what she'd written before I finally let myself act. She started by telling me she loved me. She said she'd had more happiness with me than she'd ever expected her life to hold. She said she was not writing the letter from bitterness, but from clarity. The kind of clarity, she wrote, that comes to you when you know you're running out of time and you can finally see everything plainly. Then she told me about our son, not the version of him I'd been carrying, the actual one. She told me that in the last year of her illness, when I was working my part-time consulting hours and she was home recovering from her second round of treatment, our son had come to the house 3 times, not to visit. Each time, she said he'd gone through the filing cabinet in the study. He didn't know she was awake. She'd hear him from the bedroom, the slide of the metal drawer, the shuffle of papers. The 3rd time, she'd gotten up and stood in the doorway. He'd had the folder with our financial documents open on the desk. He told her he was just checking something. He smiled. He said not to worry. She went back to bed. But she was not, she wrote, a stupid woman. She'd been a nurse for 32 years. She'd seen families at their worst, at their most frightened, at their most desperate, and grabbing. She knew what it looked like when someone was counting what they expected to inherit. She also told me about the money. This part was harder to read. 4 years before she died, our son had come to her, not to me, to her, and asked to borrow $60,000. He said it was for a business venture, a franchise opportunity that his colleague had recommended. He said he didn't want to worry me because he knew I'd been stressed about my own retirement timeline. She'd given it to him from her personal savings account, the one she'd maintained quietly for years, money she'd set aside from her own salary, money she'd thought of as her safety cushion. She told him she didn't need it repaid right away. He never mentioned it again. She never told me. I kept it from you, she wrote, because I didn't want you to see him the way I started to see him. I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept waiting for him to bring it up himself, to pay it back, to at least say thank you. He never did. And then I got sick, and I realized, if I don't tell you now, you'll spend the rest of your life not knowing. I had to set the letter down after that page. I sat for a minute with my eyes closed. I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the Christmases, my son's hand on my shoulder at his mother's funeral, the way he'd said, "We'll get through this. Dad, I'm here." I thought about the $60,000. I picked the letter back up. The last 2 pages were about our daughter-in-law. I want to be fair here, because I am trying to tell this honestly, and not just as a grievance. I had never had a problem with my daughter-in-law. I had always thought she was a reasonable woman, a little guarded, but I attributed that to personality, to the fact that she hadn't grown up with the kind of family warmth that Sylviane and I had tried to build. I made excuses for her because I wanted to. Sylviane, it turned out, had not made those same excuses. She wrote that she'd overheard a phone call. This was 6 weeks before she died, when she was home on a weekend pass from the hospital, and she'd been resting on the sunroom couch with the door half open. Our son and his wife were in the kitchen, and they didn't know she was there. She wrote down what she'd heard as best she could remember. Her daughter-in-law had been talking about the house, about what it would sell for, about whether my name alone was on the deed or whether it would pass directly, about a conversation she'd apparently had with someone, a cousin who worked in real estate, about timing. She wasn't planning your death, Sylviane wrote, but she was planning for it. There's a difference, and it's not as much of a difference as it should be. Then, at the bottom of the last page, she wrote, "I'm not telling you this so you'll be angry. I'm telling you this so you'll be careful. You're kind and generous, and you have always wanted to believe the best of the people you love. I fell in love with you for exactly that reason. But kindness without discernment isn't kindness. It's just the door left open. Close the door, Robert. Close it gently if you can, but close it." She signed it. "All my love, always. Your Sylviane." I sat in that office for another 20 minutes before I called Elspeth back in. I didn't tell my son or my daughter-in-law that I'd been to the attorney's office. I came home that afternoon, made myself a sandwich, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the burn mark on the corner. 41 years. She'd known me well enough to know I'd need 3 years to get steady before I could handle it. She'd known me well enough to know that if she'd told me while she was still alive, I would have confronted him immediately, and it would have become about her, about protecting her peace in the time she had left, and she hadn't wanted that. She'd protected me right up to the end, and then she'd protected me past it. I sat at that table for a long time. Then I called my daughter. My daughter lives in Asheville. She teaches high school English and coaches the junior varsity tennis team and has 2 dogs she treats like family members, which I have no objection to. She's always been the quieter of my 2 children, more inward, more careful about what she says. When she was 17, she told me, "Dad, I think I just watch more than I talk." And I've always thought that was one of the wisest things anyone in our family has ever said. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was warm and uncomplicated, and I felt something loosen in my chest just hearing it. I said I needed to tell her something. I said it was about her mother. There was a brief silence. Then, "Okay, I'm here." I told her about the letter. Not every detail, not the amount, not the exact words, but the shape of it, what it meant, what I was thinking about doing. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Dad," she said finally, "I need to tell you something too." She'd seen things I hadn't seen. She'd noticed things over the years that she hadn't known how to bring to me, because she didn't want to be the one to plant suspicion in my mind about her own brother. She'd watched him at the funeral, the way he'd been talking to the estate attorney, before the reception was even over. She'd overheard her sister-in-law ask about the life insurance payout while Sylviane's sister was still in the house. "I didn't say anything," she said, "because I thought maybe I was being uncharitable. I thought maybe grief makes everyone do strange things." "Maybe it does," I said. "But Mom wasn't grieving," she said quietly, "and she saw the same things. We talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, I knew what I needed to do, and I knew I wasn't doing it out of anger. Anger fades. This was something else. This was a decision." I started by going back to Elspeth's office and spending an afternoon going through every document I had. The will, the property titles, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio that Sylviane and I had built slowly over 40 years of careful, unglamorous saving. Then I called a financial planner that Elspeth recommended, someone I'd never worked with before, someone who had no relationship with my son. I changed the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. I rewrote my will. I want to be clear about what I did and didn't do. I did not cut my son off in a rage. I did not write him a letter full of accusations. I did not confront his wife or cause a scene or tell anyone in the family what Sylviane's letter had said. I wasn't interested in the drama of it. I was interested in being careful the way Sylviane had asked me to be. What I did was restructure everything quietly. The house will not pass directly to my children. When I'm gone, it will go into a trust administered by Elspeth, with instructions for how proceeds are to be distributed. Some to my daughter, a portion to 2 local charities that Sylviane spent years volunteering with, and a portion set aside in educational funds for any grandchildren who might come along, distributed at specific ages, with specific conditions attached. My son will receive something. I'm not a man who can write his own child out of everything without grief, and I'm not sure I should be. But what he receives will be modest, carefully bounded, and managed by someone he cannot charm or pressure or manipulate with the history of being family. Sylviane would have understood that. She knew I loved him. She just didn't want my love for him to make me blind. There's a part of this that I've thought about a lot in the months since. The question of what I did wrong. Because I did something wrong. I need to say that plainly. I made it easy. For years I made it easy for my son to be the person he became. When he was in his 30s and got into credit card debt, I bailed him out and told him it was fine. When his first business failed, I gave him money to restart and called it an investment. When he and his wife needed a down payment for their first house, Sylviane and I wrote a check and told each other we were just glad to help. We helped because we loved him, but somewhere in all that helping, we never made him feel the weight of anything. We cleared every obstacle before he could develop the muscle to climb. Sylviane wrote one line about this in the letter that I keep coming back to. She wrote, "I think we loved him in a way that was easier for us than it was good for him. I've been a father for 40 years, and I don't know if I've ever read a harder sentence." My son called me in October, about 4 months after I'd made all the changes. He called to invite me to Thanksgiving. His voice was easy, normal, the voice I'd known since he was small. He asked how I was doing, whether I was keeping up with my blood pressure medication, whether I'd thought about replacing the gutters on the house before winter. He sounded, as he always does, like a son who cares about his father. Maybe he does care. Maybe the part of him that checks my gutters, and the part of him that went through the filing cabinet while his mother was sick. Maybe those 2 parts exist in the same person without contradiction. I'm 66 years old, and I've known enough people to understand that we contain things that don't add up. I told him I had other plans for Thanksgiving. My daughter was coming to Millbrook, and we were going to do something small. He said that sounded nice. He said to tell his sister hello. We hung up, and I sat for a while in the quiet of the house. I thought about Sylviane, about the letter she'd written when she knew she was running out of time, sitting with that cream-colored stationery and choosing every word. I thought about the love and the grief and the precision of it, the careful way she'd waited, calibrated the timing, made sure I'd had 3 years to find my footing before she handed me something that would knock it out from under me. She'd been protecting me all the way to the end and past it, and I hadn't even known. Thanksgiving that year was just the two of us, my daughter and me. She drove up from Asheville with her 2 dogs and a pecan pie she'd made from a recipe that had been in her mother's handwriting on an index card since 1987. We made the rest of it together. The turkey, the green beans, the sweet potatoes with the brown sugar crust the way Sylviane used to make it. We set 2 extra places at the table. Neither of us said why. We didn't need to. After dinner we sat in the living room, with the dogs at our feet and a fire going, and my daughter asked me if I was okay. Not in a perfunctory way. In the way she's always asked, quietly, with her eyes on my face, like she actually wants to know the answer. I thought about it for a moment before I answered. "I'm not entirely okay," I said, "but I'm steady." She nodded. "That's enough." And it was enough. I've been thinking lately about what it means to be an optimist. I've always considered myself one. Sylviane used to tease me about it. She said I was the kind of man who, if the roof started leaking, would say at least the plants inside would get some water. She meant it affectionately, I think. Mostly affectionately. But there's a kind of optimism that isn't quite honest. That tells you what you want to hear. That looks at a person's best moments and decides those are the whole story. I'd been doing that with my son for years, filling in the gaps with the version of him I'd hoped for and calling it faith. What Sylviane gave me, in that letter, in those 4 careful pages of cream-colored paper, was not pessimism. It wasn't the opposite of love. It was just the truth, handed to me by someone who knew me well enough to know I'd need time before I could hold it properly. I keep the letter in the drawer of the nightstand on my side of the bed. Her side still has her reading glasses on it. I've thought about putting them away 3 years later, and every time I think about it, I decide not to. Not yet. Some things you shouldn't clear out just because they belong to someone who's gone. Some things stay because they're still doing their job. The glasses are still there. The letter is in the drawer. And I am, for the first time in a long time, walking through my own life with my eyes open, with the door not locked, not barricaded, but no longer carelessly left open either. Just closed gently the way she asked, the way she always knew I could if someone reminded me.